So in this questions screen, I now want to output these example questions, one after each other. And for that, down here in this questions screen state object, which is where we have this build method, we of course want to output the question text and then below that, the answers to the question. So we have a couple of widgets above each other here. And that of course screams for a column. And this column then has a couple of child widgets passed to it through that children prop here. And the first child at the top should be a text widget, which is used to output the actual question text. So here with this widget, we'll output the question, and we'll use the actual question text soon. Below that question text, I then want to have some spacing and then a couple of buttons where each button represents one selectable answer. So to add the spacing, we can use the good old sized box again and set it to a height of, let's say, 30 maybe. And to get rid of these blue squiggly lines, we can add const in front of this list to make sure that all the items in the list are turned into const items, and therefore they are only stored in memory once and can be reused by Dart, as you learned. And below this sized box, we then need our buttons for the different answers. Now here I want to use the elevated button widget, which is another widget provided by Flutter. And for the moment, I'll just set onPressed to an empty anonymous function. We'll make sure that we do something more useful here later. And now we actually have to remove const here because the button isn't const. And we have to add it manually in front of the widgets that can be const, text and sized box. And for the child here, for this elevated button, we want to use the text widget to output some text as part of the button. So by combining these two widgets, as we did it before, for the text button and the outlined buttons as well in this course. And here, the text would be answer 1 for the first button. And of course, this can now be repeated so that we also have a second answer and a third answer and so on. Now, soon this will be generated dynamically to really use the actual answers of the question we selected. For the moment, I'll just hard-code it like this. If we now save this and force a reload, and we go to this questions page, it looks like this. And of course, that's not the final look I want to have. Instead, I want to make sure that we take the full available width here for the column. And I again want to make sure that my question and the answers are centered. Now for that, we could use the same approach as we do on the start screen, where we wrap column with a center widget and then set the main axis size on column to main axis size.min. This would work here as well. But to show you also an alternative, we can wrap this column widget with another widget, and that would be the sized box widget. And here I now want to set the width to a special value that will take as much width as is available. So instead of hard coding this to a width of 100 pixels or anything like that, which will probably not be the exact width of the device we're running on, I can use a special value built into Dart, and that's double.infinity. Now that's a special value which simply means use as much width as you can, be as wide as possible. It's built into Dart and we can use it as a value for width here, and with that you will see that we now at least take the entire width. To center the questions and the answers vertically, we then can use another setting inside of column, and there we can set the main axis alignment. You might remember that for main axis size, I mentioned that the main axis for column is the vertical axis from top to bottom. And hence the main axis alignment also controls the vertical alignment. So whether it's centered or if it's at the top or the end of the vertical axis. And we can set this to one of the built-in values, for example, main axis alignment center. And if we do this and save that, we now see that this is centered. So this is an alternative to using a center widget as a wrapper and setting the main axis size. And one possible advantage of this approach is that you can set the main axis alignment not just to center, but for example also to space around or space between. With space around, for example, the items would be distributed equally across the screen, including the sized widget, which is invisible but also takes up its space. It's not what we need here, but it could be another reason for using main axis alignment in certain situations. Here it's center, which I want though, so that it looks like this. Of course, the colors and so on are not final yet though. And that therefore is the next step. I want to change the question color and of course also the look and styling of my answer buttons.